What happens when a nation dares to silence the voice of heaven? What doom falls upon a people who bow before their idols of power and wealth, yet spit upon the God who raises up kings and casts them down? It is not merely a question for dusty scrolls and ancient ruins. It is the heartbeat of prophecy, pounding across the centuries, echoing with a terror that nations still refuse to hear. The land was Israel, chosen, blessed, bound by covenant. Its valleys once rippled with golden grain. Its vineyards stretched like rivers of green across the hills. The people rejoiced, calling themselves children of Abraham, heirs of David, secure beneath the shadow of God's promises. To the eye, it was a land of strength and beauty, pulsing with life. Yet beneath the songs and festivals lay rot. On the high places, altars smoked to strange gods. Baal and Asherah claimed sacrifices that once belonged only to the Lord. Priests grew corrupt, rulers proud, prophets silenced or mocked. The nation swore oaths in the name of Yahweh, yet their hearts bowed to gold and power. Their cities thrived, but their souls withered. Then thunder rolled from the north. Assyria, the very name sent shivers through kingdoms. Their kings carved boasts into stone. Nations melt before me. Cities vanish at my approach. Rivers of blood follow my sword. They were masters of terror. Captives were led with hooks in their jaws. Rebellious cities were flayed and burned. Their empire stretched like a devouring fire, swallowing lands one after another. Imagine the dread in Israel's watchtowers. A rider gallops from the border, cloak torn, face white with horror. His voice cracks. They are coming! Behind him, the dust of thousands rises into the sky. Spears glint like a sea of stars. The ground shakes beneath iron chariots. The roar of their advance is like the growl of lions. Villages fall in hours. Children scream as they are torn from their mother's arms. Smoke pillars climb into the heavens where once prayers had risen. The covenant people scatter like sheep chased by wolves. 10 tribes, names written in the book of life, are carried into the shadows of exile, never again to stand whole in their land. And over it all, the prophets' voices echo. Hosea had warned, Ephraim is joined to idols. Leave him alone. Assyria shall be his king, because they refuse to return. Isaiah thundered, the Lord will bring against Israel the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates, the king of Assyria with all his glory. But Israel laughed. They trusted in their treaties with Egypt, in their gold piled high in storehouses, in the strength of their fortresses. But Assyria was no mere conqueror. Assyria was the rod in the hand of God. The Almighty himself declared, I will send him against a godless nation to trample them down like mud in the streets. This was the shattering. Israel, beloved of God, chosen for glory, crushed beneath the boots of a pagan empire because pride deafened their ears and hardened their hearts. And here lies the terror that pierces across the ages. If Israel fell while boasting of its chosenness, what of today's nations that exalt themselves? If the Lord once raised Assyria to humble his people, what power might he raise now in our age of superpowers and armies and missiles? Look around. Towers of glass climb into the heavens. Leaders boast of their empires. Nations parade their weapons as if they were gods of iron. Yet arrogance still festers. Idols still multiply. The voice of heaven is still silenced by the noise of pride. This is no tale of ancient dust. This is no legend carved on broken stones. This is a mirror held to the face of every nation that forgets its maker. This is not just history. This is prophecy unfolding before our eyes. Long before the thunder of Assyria shook the earth, the story of Israel began in the quiet whisper of a covenant. A man named Abram, called out from Ur of the Chaldees, left behind the temples of idols and the glitter of Mesopotamian power to follow a voice that thundered without thunder. Go to the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Thus was planted a seed that would grow into a people unlike any other. They were not chosen for their might, nor their numbers, nor their wisdom. They were chosen because the God of heaven set his love upon them. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob became Israel, 12 sons, forming 12 tribes, names that would echo across eternity. Yet from the very beginning, division haunted the bloodline. Ishmael, the son of the bondwoman, warred in spirit with Isaac, the son of promise. Esau's descendants, the Edomites, rose as perpetual foes of Jacob's line. Even among the 12 tribes themselves, rivalry and jealousy simmered. The covenant was sacred, but the human heart was restless. In Egypt, Israel became a multitude. Once slaves under Pharaoh's lash, they were delivered by the mighty hand of God through Moses. The Red Sea split before them. Sinai blazed with fire, and the law was given, holy statutes to bind them to the living God. They were to be a kingdom of priests, a light to the nations, a people set apart. But the wilderness revealed the truth of their hearts. Murmuring replaced gratitude. Idolatry rose even in the shadow of the mountain of fire. Yet God, faithful to his covenant, carried them into the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joshua led them in conquest. Tribes received their inheritance, and the land of milk and honey became theirs. But unity was fragile. In the days of the judges, every man did what was right in his own eyes. Sin bred chaos. Chaos bred oppression, and cries for deliverance rose again and again. Then came the monarchy. Saul, tall and handsome, yet disobedient. David, the shepherd king, whose harp calmed Saul's madness and whose sling toppled Goliath, was chosen by God to establish a throne that would endure forever. Solomon, his son, built the temple, gold and cedar rising to the heavens, the Ark of the Covenant resting in the Holy of Holies. At last, Israel was a kingdom of glory, but with prosperity came corruption. Solomon's wives led him to idols. His son Rehoboam's arrogance split the kingdom in two, Judah in the south, Israel in the north. 10 tribes tore away from the house of David, setting up their own altars, their own kings, their own destiny. From that moment, 2 bloodlines walked 2 paths. Judah, with Jerusalem and the temple, clung, though falteringly, to the covenant. Israel in the north spiraled into idolatry, placing golden calves at Bethel, and Dan, crying out to gods who could not save. Prophets arose, pleading with them to return. Elijah called down fire on Mount Carmel. Amos thundered of justice, rolling like a mighty river. Hosea spoke of a bride who had betrayed her husband, yet whom God longed to redeem. But Israel hardened its heart, and so the covenant, though eternal, carried a warning. The God who gave the land could also take it away. The God who raised up his people could also hand them over to their enemies. For the covenant was not a shield for rebellion. It was a sacred bond, demanding faithfulness. The ancient origins of Israel, then, are not merely a story of promise. They are a story of fracture, of division, of blessings squandered and warnings ignored. The patriarchs built the foundation. The covenant gave the law. The kingdom rose in splendor. But already the shadow of judgment stretched long across the land. Assyria had not yet come. Babylon's lions had not yet roared, but the seeds of downfall were sown in the soil of their pride. The very story that began with Abraham's obedience now trembled on the edge of disaster. The fracture of Israel into two kingdoms was more than political. It was spiritual. Like a body torn in half, the people of God stumbled into weakness, ripe for the jaws of surrounding empires. The northern kingdom of Israel built its shrines to golden calves, trusting in idols to protect them. Judah in the south clung to the temple, yet its kings faltered in pride and compromise. Division invited danger, and danger soon came in the form of Assyria. The first clash between Israel and Assyria was not fought with mere weapons. It was fought with prophecy. In the days of King Menahem of Israel, Assyria loomed like a storm cloud. The mighty Tiglath-Pileser III, ruthless and ambitious, stretched his hand across the Fertile Crescent, swallowing nations as easily as a lion devours prey. Cities that resisted were crushed, populations uprooted and scattered. To the trembling northern kingdom, Assyria was both terror and temptation. Menahem chose submission over resistance. He paid tribute, 1,000 talents of silver, to Tiglath-Pileser, stripping wealth from the land to purchase temporary peace. The king of Assyria withdrew, but at a cost. Israel had bent the knee to a pagan power, acknowledging the supremacy of an earthly king over the God of heaven. The prophets saw it for what it was. Hosea cried out that Ephraim was like a silly dove, fluttering to Egypt, fluttering to Assyria. Isaiah thundered against alliances with foreign powers, warning Judah not to trust in horses, chariots, or treaties, but in the Lord alone. The clash was not yet swords against swords. It was faith against fear, covenant against compromise. But fear won. When Pekah seized Israel's throne, he turned away from Assyria and made an alliance with Aram-Damascus. Together, they sought to pressure Judah into joining them against the northern power. Ahaz, king of Judah, panicked. Instead of seeking the Lord, he reached for Assyria's hand. In desperation, he sent silver and gold from the temple itself to Tiglath-Pileser, crying, "I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me." And rescue came, but at a terrible price. The Assyrian king marched south, crushing Damascus, plundering Israel, and dragging captives away in chains. Territories of Naphtali and Galilee were emptied, their people deported, their land left desolate. The first taste of exile had begun. In that moment, Israel's covenant identity cracked. The land promised to Abraham was being carved away. The children of Jacob were scattered among nations, and Judah, though spared immediate destruction, stood humiliated, its king having placed the treasures of God's house at the feet of an idol-worshipping tyrant. Yet, in the middle of despair, prophecy blazed with both judgment and hope. Isaiah stood before trembling Ahaz and declared, "The virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us." It was as if God was saying, "Even as you sell yourselves to Assyria, I remain with you. Even in your faithlessness, my covenant plan will not fail." The first prophetic clash, then, was not merely between nations, but between heaven and earth. Faith and fear, covenant and compromise. Israel reached out for help from man instead of turning back to God, and by that choice, they sealed their fate. The lion had tasted blood. Assyria would return. The northern kingdom's flirtation with foreign powers would soon become its downfall. The prophet's warnings would no longer be words. They would be fire and sword. This was only the beginning. Empires rise like mountains from the dust, sudden, towering, glorious. Yet, as swiftly as they ascend, they crumble into ashes. Behind each rise and fall stands not the will of man, but the hand of the Almighty. The story of Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, and Persia is not merely the history of ancient powers. It is the unfolding of prophecy, the stage on which God revealed His sovereignty over the kingdoms of men. Assyria came first, a predator clothed in iron. From Nineveh's walls they marched, a people of relentless conquest. Their kings carved cruelty into stone, boasting of cities drowned in blood. Assyria was no accident of politics. It was a scourge raised up by God. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, Isaiah declared. Against a godless nation I send him. When Israel sought safety in idols and foreign treaties, Assyria descended like a flood. Shalmaneser besieged Samaria for 3 long years until its walls cracked. Sargon, too, swept the survivors into exile, scattering the 10 tribes across the empire. They vanished into history, lost among nations. The northern kingdom was gone, devoured. But Assyria's roar did not last forever. In arrogance, they exalted themselves, thinking they were masters of destiny. They forgot they were only the rod, not the hand that held it. And so, the rod was broken. Out of the ashes of Assyria rose Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's armies stormed across the land, their banners blazing with the pride of empire. Babylon was the city of hanging gardens, of golden idols, of walls so vast men said chariots could race atop them. It was the seat of glory, and the instrument of judgment upon Judah. Jerusalem burned beneath Babylon's fury. The Temple of Solomon, once filled with God's glory, was torn stone from stone. The ark was gone, the priests slain, the people carried into captivity by the rivers of Babylon. And there, prophecy thundered again. Daniel, torn from Jerusalem's ruins, beheld visions of beasts rising from the sea, a lion with eagle's wings, a bear devouring, a leopard swift as lightning, and a final beast, terrible and strong. Each beast was an empire, each one a chapter in God's plan. Babylon was but the first. Ezekiel, too, by the Chebar River, saw wheels within wheels and a throne above, declaring that even in exile, God's glory was not bound to temples of stone nor cities of men. Babylon thought itself eternal, but the handwriting on the wall declared otherwise. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, your kingdom is numbered, weighed, and found wanting. The very night, Babylon fell. Cyrus the Great entered without a battle. The Medes and Persians rose as swiftly as Babylon fell. Yet, unlike Assyria and Babylon, Persia was chosen for a different purpose. Isaiah, centuries before, had named Cyrus by name, calling him God's anointed, chosen to release Israel from bondage. And so it came to pass. After 70 years of captivity, the exiles returned. The temple was rebuilt. The covenant people walked once more in the land of promise. Persia, the ram of Daniel's vision, ruled vast territories, yet was used to shepherd God's plan. Meanwhile, Egypt still lingered in the background, the old rival, the ancient house of bondage. Pharaohs schemed, armies marched, treaties were made and broken. But Egypt was no longer the power it once was. Its role in prophecy was that of a fading shadow, a reminder of chains broken long ago, a temptation Israel always returned to in her fear. "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help," Isaiah cried, "but do not look to the Holy One of Israel." Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Egypt, each believed itself the master of its own destiny, the architect of history. Yet the prophets revealed the deeper truth. Nations rise at God's command and fall at His decree. Kings are lifted like waves and cast down like foam. What seems to men as the glory of empires is but the working out of divine judgment and mercy. And so the haunting question lingers. Were these empires merely tools in God's hand? Instruments of wrath, of justice, of redemption? If so, then what of the superpowers of today? Are they too unwitting pawns upon the chessboard of the Almighty? The story of ancient empires is not finished. Their rise and fall still echo in the struggles of our own age. Prophecy is never a whisper. It is a trumpet blast. It shatters illusions, cuts through the noise of politics and power, and lays bare the truth. Nations stand or fall at the will of God. Long before Assyria's armies darkened Israel's horizons, the prophets had spoken with terrifying clarity. Hosea walked the streets of Samaria with a broken heart. His marriage to an unfaithful wife became a living parable of Israel's betrayal. He cried, "You have plowed wickedness, you have reaped iniquity. Therefore you shall eat the fruit of lies. Because you trusted in your own way, in the multitude of your mighty men, the tumult of war shall arise among your people." Hosea warned that Assyria would be their king because they refused to return to the Lord. Yet the people scoffed. Amos thundered from the hills, a shepherd with fire on his lips, "For 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment. They sell the righteous for silver, and the poor for a pair of sandals." His words were a storm. Justice perverted, the needy trampled, the wealthy lounging on ivory beds, while the land groaned. And then, the verdict: "An adversary shall surround the land. He shall bring down your defenses, and your palaces shall be plundered." Isaiah, standing in Jerusalem, warned both Israel and Judah alike. Woe to the proud crown of Ephraim! Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help! The Lord will bring against them the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates, the king of Assyria, with all his glory. It will overflow all its channels. It will sweep into Judah, reaching up to the neck. Isaiah saw the empire of Assyria as a river unleashed, drowning the land. Yet in the same breath, he promised hope. Emmanuel, God with us. Micah lifted his voice as well. "Hear this, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is right. Because of you, Zion shall be plowed like a field. Jerusalem shall become a heap of rubble." The warnings came from every corner, every prophet, every season. They were not vague riddles, but piercing accusations. Israel's sin was idolatry, injustice, pride, and trust in human power instead of divine protection. Their punishment was certain: exile, devastation, the silence of a land once flowing with milk and honey. But the prophecies carried a double edge. Alongside judgment came glimpses of mercy, promises woven into the fabric of doom. Hosea declared that after scattering, God would gather. Isaiah foresaw a remnant returning, a stump from Jesse's root that would one day blossom into the Messiah. Even in wrath, the Lord remembered mercy. The prophetic warnings were like fire, flashing in the night sky, too bright to ignore, too terrifying to dismiss. Yet the people did ignore. They turned back to their idols, their treaties, their armies. And so, the fire fell. Here lies the question that burns across time. Were those warnings only for Israel, long vanished into exile, or do they reach across the centuries to us? Could it be that the sins of ancient Samaria, greed, injustice, idolatry, arrogance, are the very sins of modern nations? Could the roar of Assyria echo again, this time in the boots of today's superpowers? The prophets never spoke only for their own day. Their words were seeds planted for the ages, truths that ripen whenever nations stray from God. And if Israel, God's chosen, could be devoured for its rebellion, what of us? Could these words be unfolding in our own time? Prophecy does not sleep in the dust of ancient scrolls. It walks, it breathes, it awakens in the headlines of our time. The same patterns that toppled kingdoms 3,000 years ago are stirring again. Pride, alliances, betrayals, wars, and the hand of God moving among nations. Look to the Middle East. The soil of prophecy is still soaked with conflict. Israel, reborn in 1948 after nearly 2 millennia of exile, stands as a nation once more. Like a reed shaken by the wind, it bends beneath constant pressure, surrounded by hostile neighbors, threatened by missiles from Lebanon, Gaza, and Iran's proxies. It mirrors ancient Israel, trembling before Assyria's armies. The prophets spoke of cities laid low, of enemies encamped on every side, and even today the same specter hovers over Jerusalem. Iran, heir to the Persian Empire, looms as both rival and player in the prophetic stage. Where Cyrus once decreed freedom for the Jews, today Iran's leaders vow Israel's destruction. Nuclear ambitions rumble beneath the surface, like a modern siege engine being prepared for the battlefield. Is this not the echo of ancient Persia, reshaped for a new age? To the north, Russia stretches like a shadow. Its alliances with Iran and Syria form a web of power that unsettles the world. Ezekiel spoke of a great northern confederacy, Gog of the land of Magog, that would one day descend upon Israel like a storm. Could these alignments be the first movements of that ancient warning? Meanwhile, America, once a nation that called itself under God, wrestles with its own identity. Once a friend and defender of Israel, it now wavers, pulled between alliances and shifting policies. Its towers of wealth and arsenals of might mirror the arrogance of empires past. Could America, like ancient Israel, be trusting more in treaties and technology than in the living God? And Europe, fractured yet bound in union, reaches for influence in the Middle East. Nations rise and fall in its councils, yet prophecy hints of a revived Roman presence at the climax of history. Could the seeds be sprouting even now? The parallels are undeniable. Israel's ancient sin was not simply idolatry, but misplaced trust, leaning on Egypt, bargaining with Assyria instead of leaning on God. Today, nations clamor for alliances, treaties, and superpower backing. Yet, beneath it all, the spiritual question remains: whom do they trust? The living God or the arm of flesh? Consider the modern battlefield. Drones circle the skies, missiles strike in the night, cyber armies clash in silence. But are these weapons anything more than updated chariots and swords? Behind the technology lies the same spirit of human pride, the same illusion of invincibility. Assyria boasted of rivers of blood. Today, nations boast of sanctions, tanks, and warheads. The arrogance is identical, and the warnings remain. Jesus himself, centuries after Assyria and Babylon had fallen, spoke of wars and rumors of wars, of nations rising against nation, of Jerusalem trampled until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. He declared that when fig trees put forth their leaves, the end was near. Israel's rebirth, the return of Jews to their ancient land, is not coincidence. It is prophecy budding before our eyes. Even the refugee crises of our time echo the scattering of tribes. Millions displaced from Syria, Iraq, and beyond mirror the ancient exiles dragged across deserts by Assyrian chains. The world watches with weariness, yet the prophets remind us nothing is random. History is a pattern, and the pattern is prophecy. So we must ask, if Assyria was raised to devour Israel then, what of the superpowers now? Could God be positioning them as instruments of judgment or redemption? Could the alliances forming in the Middle East be the modern shadow of ancient coalitions? Could the roar of Assyria be reborn in Moscow's commands, Tehran's threats, Beijing's strategies, or Washington's pride? The truth is unsettling. We are not merely reading prophecy. We are living inside it, the same stage, the same land, the same people. The same God who judged his nation once still rules over nations today. And so the parallels become warnings. Israel then trusted in idols and foreign kings, and it fell. If nations today trust in their wealth, their weapons, their politics, while silencing the voice of heaven, will they fare any better? Prophecy is not entertainment. It is a mirror. And when we hold that mirror up to our world, we see Assyria's shadow looming again. We are living inside prophecy right now. Beneath the clash of empires, beyond the noise of tanks, missiles, and treaties, lies a war no camera can capture. It is older than Assyria, older than Babylon, older even than Eden. The prophets saw shadows of it. The apostles named it. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Ephesians 6:12. Assyria thought itself strong because of iron and cruelty. Babylon believed it ruled through gold and glory. Persia trusted its law, Rome its legions. Yet behind every throne stood an invisible hand, powers and principalities, dark rulers that move men to pride, nations to war, and hearts to rebellion, work their schemes in the shadows. Israel's downfall was not only political, but spiritual. When they bowed to Baal, they were not merely choosing another religion. They were aligning themselves with demonic forces, masquerading as gods. The altars in Samaria were more than stones. They were gateways through which the enemy claimed power. And so Assyria's march was not simply history. It was judgment carried along by unseen hosts. Even today, behind the flags and speeches, another war rages. Ideologies that deny God, cultures that exalt self, systems that exploit the weak. These are not random. They are arrows shot by an ancient adversary. Just as Assyria was stirred to devour Israel, so nations now are stirred toward conflict, hatred, and chaos by the same dark spirits. But the spiritual battle is not only global, it is personal. The same enemy that seduced kings to idolatry whispers to every human heart. Trust in power, worship wealth, bow to fear. The battlefield stretches from palaces to living rooms, from thrones to private thoughts. Yet, prophecy declares another truth. Darkness does not have the final word. Elisha once prayed for his servant's eyes to be opened, and the young man saw the hills ablaze with chariots of fire. Daniel saw the Ancient of Days seated on his throne, with streams of fire issuing forth, while nations trembled. John, exiled on Patmos, beheld a rider on a white horse, called Faithful and True, who would strike the nations with the sword of his mouth. The spiritual battle rages, but its outcome is certain. The powers that stirred Assyria will fall as Assyria fell. The same God who allowed his people to be judged has promised final victory through his Messiah. Behind every earthly empire, a greater war is fought, and behind that greater war, a greater king is coming. Prophecy does not end with Assyria's roar or Babylon's chains. Those were but shadows, preludes to the great crescendo still ahead. The scroll of history bends toward one climactic hour, when all nations will gather, when the clash of empires will give way to the final confrontation between heaven's king and the powers of darkness. The prophets saw it dimly, like lightning flashing on a distant horizon. Joel spoke of multitudes in the valley of decision, where the sun and moon grow dark, and the heavens tremble as the Lord roars from Zion. Zechariah foresaw Jerusalem surrounded, nations gathered like vultures, until the Lord himself stood upon the Mount of Olives. The mountain would split in two, the earth convulsing under the weight of his presence. John, in exile on Patmos, was carried forward in vision to the great war of all wars, Armageddon. He saw kings of the earth deceived by spirits of darkness, drawn together to battle against the Lamb, armies arrayed in numbers like sand upon the sea, banners flying, weapons gleaming. Yet when the heavens opened, their boasting melted away. A rider appeared, clothed in white, eyes blazing like fire, on his head many crowns. His name, Faithful and True, his robe dipped in blood. From his mouth came a sharp sword to strike the nations. The armies of heaven followed him, clothed in fine linen, white and pure. With a word, he shattered the power of kings, and with his breath, he toppled the thrones of men. This is the fulfillment of every shadow, the answer to every prophecy. Assyria devoured Israel. Babylon burned Jerusalem. Persia and Rome ruled with iron. But all were fragments of the final picture. The true culmination is the return of the King. And what of Israel in that day? Zechariah declares that the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem will look upon him whom they pierced, and they will mourn as one mourns for an only son. The remnant will awaken, the covenant will be fulfilled, and the deliverer will come out of Zion. The nations will rage, but the Lamb will triumph. Armageddon is not the end of history. It is the breaking of dawn. The kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. This is the destiny toward which all prophecy drives. Not Assyria's pride, not Babylon's splendor, not Persia's power, nor Rome's might can stop it. The final empire is his. The coming fulfillment is certain. The king is on his way, from Abraham's covenant beneath the stars, to the roar of Assyria's armies, to the burning of Jerusalem. The prophets have spoken with one voice. Nations rise and fall, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Israel trusted in idols and treaties, and Assyria devoured them. Judah bent before Babylon, and its temple turned to ashes. Persia, Greece, Rome, each empire rose like a giant, only to be cut down by the unseen hand of heaven. And still the story moves forward. In our age, we see the same patterns repeated. Alliances forged in fear, Wars waged in arrogance, nations boasting of power while silencing the voice of God. The prophets remind us that history is not random. It is prophecy unfolding. Assyria was not simply an ancient empire. It was a warning, a mirror, a living parable for every people who would forget their Maker. If Israel, God's chosen, could fall under judgment, what of the superpowers of today? If God once raised Assyria as a rod of discipline, what instruments might he raise now? Yet in all the darkness, hope burns. The same prophets who thundered judgment also whispered redemption. Hosea spoke of restoration, Isaiah of Emmanuel, Daniel of a kingdom that will never end. John saw the rider on the white horse, the king returning to set all things right. Judgment is certain, but so is salvation. Doom is real, but so is deliverance. This journey through prophecy is not mere history. It is revelation, alive in our time, calling us to watch, to discern, to return to the Lord while the hour remains. If these words stir you, let them not end here. Share them, speak of them, keep the flame burning. Subscribe, like, and comment, not for vanity's sake, but that others may see and awaken to these revelations. For prophecy was never meant to be hidden. It was given to be proclaimed. And this is only the beginning. For beyond Assyria's roar lies Babylon's mystery, Persia's decree, Rome's dominion, and the visions of beasts that Daniel saw. In the next chapter, we will journey deeper into those visions, uncovering how the empires of yesterday still cast their shadows across the nations of today. The story is not finished. The king is still coming,